Part 2. Thinking like our audiences. In the performance of good magic, the mind is led on, step by step, to ingeniously defeat its own logic. Vernon. In the first section, we explored how to think like a magician. Now we enter the headspace of our spectators. We begin with a more basic overview of the territory by Dariel Fitzkee, and then we jump into more complex terrain, courtesy of Derren Brown, on specific techniques to help us think like our audiences. Processes within the spectator's mind by Dariel Fitzkee. The intended dupe of the magician's wiles is, of course, the spectator. He is the objective. All of the performer's endeavor is aimed at deceiving him. He is the obstacle the magician encounters. In him are combined the formidable barriers the deceiver must breach and the very weaknesses that make him vulnerable. It is the magician's task to learn how to avoid the barriers and to attack the weak spots. It might be interesting to look at things from his viewpoint for the moment. What the spectator sees and what the average magician thinks the spectator sees might be considerably surprising, even revealing. Deception is actually magic in reverse. What the spectators see is magic, presuming that the performer's efforts have been successful. The identical performance, from the magician's viewpoint, is deception. The spectator sees things that appear to be impossible. The magician sees happenings that are not at all mysterious. When the performer does the egg bag trick, the spectator believes he sees an egg taken from an empty bag. The magician, from his viewpoint, merely takes an egg from a secret compartment in the bag. So, in order that the operation may become deception, it is mandatory that the magician realizes at all times what the spectator sees and understands. The source of the spectator's experience, magical or otherwise, is his perceptions. Everything he undergoes is perceived in some manner through his senses. The sum total of his conscious life comes to him through the five senses, but more particularly through the senses of seeing and hearing. The spectator's senses can convey to him only what is seen, heard, felt, tasted, or smelled. The egg and the egg bag are seen. What he sees the performer do with them comes through his eyes. What the performer says about them comes to the spectator through his ears. But the mind, not the eye, sees. The mind, not the ear, hears. The mind, not the fingers, feels. So it is with all the senses. Ultimately, the sense impression is a function of the mind. Through these senses, the mind is this spectator's means of direct acquaintance with that which is external to him. But his perceptive sense includes both awareness and consciousness. He is aware of something that is outside of himself. He is aware of this through his own vigilance in observation, or it may come through information. Awareness is the result of drawing inferences. It is a deriving by reasoning or implication, a concluding from facts or premises, or a finding as a consequence, conclusion, or probability. These come from what he sees, hears, feels, and acquires from the other senses. But the mind, too, is involved in the process deeply. So when the magician shows the spectator the egg, the latter's awareness carries him much further than the mere act of seeing. He recognizes it as an egg because he is familiar with eggs through past experience. He knows eggs to be definitely material objects with certain definite identifying characteristics. He knows the egg would be broken if it were to be struck against the hand as the magician strikes the bag into which it is placed. He knows the egg would fall from the bag when the bag is inverted if the egg were inside. He also knows anything heavy which might be inside of a cloth bag would fall out if the bag were inverted. Well, here we are already, going into the force of gravity. Before we could finish, ultimately we might possibly explore a considerable portion of his education and personal experience. There is another factor present while the spectator is perceiving. This is consciousness. Even while this spectator is aware of what he is experiencing, he is also sensible to an inward state. This sensibility to an inward state or an outward fact is consciousness. It is a step beyond awareness. It applies particularly to that which is felt within this spectator. But since this spectator is conscious as well of what he sees, hears, feels, and otherwise apprehends, these too enter his mind. This, his consciousness of a thing, may range from mere recognition to direct attention. It is that peculiar function of being aware of an inward state that particularly interests us here. This is because the spectator, influenced by past experience, does not necessarily believe all he sees. This is especially true at a magician's demonstration. The spectator comes to the performance prejudiced against what he is to see. Thus, if the performer were to handle the egg in a manner unlike the way in which an egg is usually handled, the spectator would be conscious of a jarring note. The same might be said of the magician's remarks in connection with the egg. If he were to refer to it in some manner so as to suggest that, perhaps, the egg were not an ordinary egg, the spectator would be conscious of that incongruity. It is curious to note just how strongly these remarks affect the spectator's mental processes. If the magician were to hold the egg up and say, "This is a most extraordinary egg," the spectators would take the opposite viewpoint. They would be certain the egg was quite ordinary. But if the performer were to say, "This is an ordinary egg," the spectators would immediately suspect it. It is almost a safe rule that the spectators invariably disbelieve what the magician says to them, if what he says seems to be important to him. That is one reason why direct statements are usually avoided by skillful magicians, when an important phase of the operation of the trick is involved. The more skillful magicians will make direct statements only in connection with unimportant details or when their direct statements can be and are substantiated. On the other hand, the skillful magician relies upon indirect methods where something vital is concerned. He handles and refers to the important thing as if it were of no consequence. He avails himself of the spectator's experience, habits, familiarity with things to gain his point. He allows the spectator's consciousness to infer that the egg or bag is ordinary. He doesn't arouse the spectator's suspicions. The deception the magician seeks to accomplish is an attack upon the spectator's mind. Specifically, it is an attack upon his understanding. Since the spectator's understanding is what he learns through the senses, influenced by his reasoning, it is obvious that the magician must influence what the spectator's senses convey to the latter. Of course, the magician must also influence the factors which contribute to the spectator's understanding. The ideas in a spectator's mind arise from stimuli. A stimulus evokes or induces a response or a reaction. Without these stimuli, there is no conscious thought. The responses resulting from these stimuli are matters of the spectator's heredity, environment, training, experience, interests, disposition, knowledge, education, and many other complex factors. Merely placing unnecessary stress upon the egg or the bag stimulates the mind to activity. Normally, the spectator's mind wanders around, picking up ideas and thoughts from varying stimuli. These stimuli may come from conscious or subconscious suggestion. Often, this is a matter of habit. Frequently, the course the mind may take is the result of an association of ideas, a chain of thought, or a path plotted by successive stimuli. These are responses which in themselves become stimuli for still other responses. Frequently, it best suits the purpose of the magician not to disturb this normal chain thinking. The spectator's understanding is no minor adversary. This understanding is the sum of the mental powers by which he has acquired, retained, and extended his knowledge. It is his power of apprehending relations. It is also his power of making inferences from these relations. What learning he has naturally comes from some source. His understanding includes what he knows from being told. It includes what he has received as implied or intended. It includes an ability to take or assume things as tacitly meant. His understanding knows through information he has received. It exercises power of comprehension. When the magician does his trick with the egg and the little black bag, he has this magnificent mental reality to encounter. It cannot be lightly dismissed. The information which this spectator's understanding acquires comes from what is seen, what is heard, and what is derived through the other senses. It also includes what is implied or suggested. It comes from reading, observation, and instruction. The acquirements of a lifetime are available to this spectator at the very moment the magician brings out the egg and the little black bag. The faculty or power of understanding is intellect. Obviously, it is the spectator's power to understand that which is immediately presented to him in sense perception. The magician usually is aware of this. But the spectator's intellect also includes those things known by process of reasoning. It is an assemblage of faculties which is concerned with knowledge. This latter phase is often overlooked by magicians. Included in the spectator's mind are all forms of conscious intelligence. This is activated intellect, the ability to exercise the higher mental functions. It is also a readiness of comprehension. To a varying degree, this spectator is a creature of thought. Don't overlook the important fact that the spectator has knowledge of things which may not even be obvious or apparent for some reason. This knowledge comes from information that has been given him, from what he observes, and from his inferences based upon his experience. From the above foundation, an extremely simplified one admittedly, we might undertake to construct our structure of deception. The spectator sees the magician himself. He is aware of the performer's appearance, his dress, his features, and his posture. He is conscious of the type of person he seems to be, of his style of talking, of his apparent educational background. He even realizes something of the performer's disposition. Yet much of this information comes to the spectator subconsciously. The mind has a way of putting together clues from here and there, clues which definitely establish this performer as an individual. It is an automatic process, the specific details of which the spectator is totally unaware. Suddenly ask the spectator what kind of person the performer is, his appearance, his mannerisms, his disposition, and other characteristics. The spectator will answer readily enough. He will also reveal much more than the details the eyes have perceived. Mixed with what the eye brings to him will be opinions and conclusions possible only through mental activity, coupled with what he has observed. Take the egg we have referred to, for example. It might be the proper size, the proper shape, and the proper color. Yet the spectator may be conscious that it is not a real egg. His conclusion has been formed through subtle details which he, himself, might not be able to identify. The same might hold true of the bag. This spectator might have convictions that the bag is not as simple as it seems. These are not necessarily convictions based upon mere suspicions. They may be convictions created by intangible details, which, when brought together, subconsciously influence the spectator's opinion and conclusion. This might be caused by the performer's manner of handling the egg or the bag. While he is viewing the performer, the spectator, of course, seeing the manner in which the magician conducts himself with the properties he uses. Definitely a more revealing part of the presentation than the mere appearance of the magician and his properties is this manner of the performer. The senses merely convey to the spectator what the magician looks like and his conduct. The performer may handle these properties confidently, naturally, and with assurance, or his attitude might be unnatural, showing lack of confidence, and with too great care in handling things about which the performer is plainly worried. The tense picture also includes what the magician explains, as well as what he does not explain. It includes his auxiliary remarks, his posture, his gestures, his inflection, and all other details to which the senses are attuned. But in the background, weighing, classifying, accenting, and comparing with past experience, is the judgment and understanding of the spectator. He detects an overtone. He is aware of a relaxation or a tension. He senses confidence and its lack. He recognizes the natural and unnatural. He concludes what he believes to be true, to be dubious, and to be untrue. And much the same holds true of the properties employed by the performer. They may seem ordinary or palpably special. They may appear to be simple, complex, or even suspicious and doubtful. What the magician does with them, and to them, may be natural or unnatural. Many details go to form a conclusion. These properties have shape, size, quality, color, and meaning. They may be strange or familiar, ordinary or extraordinary, real or imitation, disguised or undisguised, even free or restricted. Coupled with the performer's conscious conduct are always the mannerisms which come subconsciously. These unconscious actions, remarks, inflections, and the like are often more revealing than what the magician sets forth consciously. Interlocked with the general appearance of the performer and his properties, part of the fabric of the mental concept shaped from the magician's behavior, manner, and mannerisms, are the words the performer uses and their delivery. These, too, are an inseparable portion of that which the spectator takes in. Like a chemical change, these basic ingredients, appearance of a performer, appearance of the properties, what the performer does, his manner, what is said, how it is said, all of these basic ingredients combine to form an entirely new, an entirely separate entity. They cannot be separated without taking from this final, complete concept, which is formed in the spectator's mind. Nothing can be taken from all of the factors which go together to form the spectator's final mental image. This is because each part is necessary to complete and color the final result. To the spectator, the details are not separate. Various stimuli, in various ways, provoke various responses. Without the exact combination of stimuli, in particulars, the specific concept received by the spectator cannot be the same. Let me illustrate this. The performer shows the egg bag empty and apparently quite ordinary in the usual manner. The egg is placed in the bag. Ultimately, the bag is shown empty. Suppose now that in placing the egg in the bag, the performer has difficulty in finding the opening to the secret compartment. Realizing that the magician is fumbling with the bag, probably sensing a momentary feeling of panic on the part of the performer, the spectator's attention is centered on the bag. This stimulates an idea that perhaps the magician is seeking a hidden pocket. Perhaps an astute spectator, having received the clue he needs, actually can follow the performer's movements even though cloaked in the bag. This spectator has imagination. He is shrewd. He is discerning. Having revealed the clue he needs, the spectator really sees the magician find the pocket and deposit the egg. Now, if the performer is using a familiar routine, when this magician brings out his hand and makes the feint as if hiding the egg beneath his armpit, this astute spectator is not deceived at all. He recognizes it for the byplay it is. Suppose, in contrast, the magician had not found it necessary to fumble. Suppose, instead, he had practiced this move so often and so thoroughly that it became one single, simple, unsuspicious movement. So the astute spectator does not receive the absolutely essential clue he needs. There is no stimulus to direct his thought to the secret pocket inspiration. When the magician's closed hand comes from the bag and makes the sweep toward the armpit, the spectator's attention follows right along, vigilantly. Now his attention is directed to the armpit, with confidence that he has caught the performer. His interest is centered upon the armpit with the same confidence, instead of upon the bag. But this is only one change that has influenced the spectator's viewpoint. Throughout the presentation of every trick, there are hundreds of factors that shape the course of the spectator's thinking. These may range from the obvious and significant to the most intangible and trivial. All of these details, even the most minor, even the very order in which they occur, shape the spectator's ultimate concept. The expert deceptionist, knowing this, takes advantage of the fact. He deliberately colors all details, both major and minor, to accomplish his purpose. Dariel Fitzkee, Showmanship for Magicians, 1943. Dariel Fitzkee, 1898 to 1977, was a magical performer and author who authored 3 major works on magic, collectively known as the Fitzkee Trilogy. Comedian Steve Martin described Fitzkee's Showmanship for Magicians, from which this essay is excerpted, as more important to me than Catcher in the Rye. Author Michael Chabon wrote, "Every work of art is one half of a secret handshake. When we engage with an audience, they are the other half of the handshake. Questions arise in the minds of our spectators. We must learn to anticipate what these questions will be and how we can answer them through our material. Peter Samelson believes these questions to be 3. What, why, and who? Why, what, and who A Theory of Questions by Peter Samelson. There are three questions that form the basis of a performing philosophy. The three questions are really three words. These words can be applied to the entire range of performance in magic. And in their simplicity comes their strength. So let's meet these three little words. But before we do, I have a few thoughts. Magic, we all seem to agree, has the potential to be an art, with a capital A. And since this is true, there are several qualities inherent to magic which urges us in that direction. The first is that it is a medium. It is a channel, a conduit. It is a means of communication through which humans share experiences, ideas, and visions. This communication is the ultimate goal, the enviable end of the road. Second, there are techniques which have grown up within the art form. It is not merely a matter of desire which creates art and the artist. Skills must be sharpened and aptitudes developed. For a period of time, the acquisition of technique becomes an end in itself. But as the artist matures, technique is relegated to its proper role, that of a means to an end. Third, there are two major communities involved in this activity and product called art. In truth, there are many communities, including the community of dealers, the publishers, those who fund performances and innovation, those who make news out of it, etc. But here we are, for the sake of usefulness, restricting ourselves to two. These communities are those of the practitioner and the spectator, which come together on those occasions called performances. Fourth, as this art communicates through imagery, there will be differences in the meaning of the art to the two communities. Due to the education of the community of practitioners, it will elicit a different psychological response, as it draws not only from the personal and cultural experiences of each viewer, but is often tainted, if you will, with the practitioner's obsession of technique. Fifth, maturity allows an artist the ability to control cultural symbolism, which comes to replace purely personal symbolism. Sixth, there is a language that exists which allows our community to talk about the art. This language allows the examination of both the product and the production. This discussion is part of that language. All this brings me to the opportunity to introduce my friends. Much thinking needs to be applied to our performances, to the structure of individual pieces, and to entire shows. In addition to allowing ourselves to be caught up in thinking about what we do, we need to learn how to do it better. In his book, Spirit Theater, 1986, Eugene Berger pinpoints one of the dangers of performance as wobbling. A better description I can't imagine. Eugene points the way toward effective performances, yet what we need are techniques to help us solve that problem he sets forth for us. That's why I want you to meet my friends. So, let me introduce you. What? Why? Who? I'd like you to meet our reader. Dear reader, I'd like to have you meet my three friends and tormentors. What? Why? And who? Getting the introductions out of the way, I'll introduce you to these three inquisitors, but it is up to you to get to know them intimately. You will find that each poses two questions, one from behind your eyes, the other from the other side of that great divide. So look at the issue from both sides now. I've added a bit of commentary to show you how I interpret the questions, but it is only my point of view. Why? Number 1, why am I doing this? And number 2, why should anyone want to watch this? If there is a reason to do magic, fooling people is not a reason, just a technique. Then what is it? What does someone have to gain from watching me perform? What? Number 1, what is this piece about? And number 2, what would this look like if it were real magic? Since magic is an imagistic art and communicates through its symbolism, each piece must have an inherent meaning. What is it? If it is to work as magic, it must look like magic. What would that be? Who? Number 1, who are you doing this for? Who is your audience? And number 2, who are you in this presentation? Who is your character? The type of audience you perform for will determine the key part of the equation in exploring what your work means. Age, economic strata, environment. They all affect what you choose to do and where. Know yourself, know your work, know your audience. Who are they? What do they want? And who is the character performing? Wouldn't that affect everything from costume to language? Spend a little time with these friends of mine. Believe me, they love magic. They will help you. Oh, you may not always be able to answer them, but just the asking of the questions is taking steps in the right direction. Peter Samelson, Mystery School, 2003. Peter Samelson. Peter Samelson's performances affect me deeply because, at virtually every moment he is on stage, his words and actions connect with the audience on a personal level. His material deals with subjects important to him: love, his childhood, and even comic books. His shows are a lesson in just how much humanity we can communicate to our audiences. In retrospect, we can look back at the early writings of Derren Brown with expectant approval. After all, he is the UK's most famous and decorated mentalist, and an undisputed thought leader in our field. But I'm old enough to remember actual events quite differently. Pure Effect came out in 2000, just before his television career catapulted him into the public's eye. The author of Pure Effect was a provocative unknown who espoused a decidedly different approach in both style and substance. He was just 30 years old when his writings were published. His career is the rare inversion of the norm. He developed a crystal-clear theory on how he wanted his performances to look, and he achieved his goals through performance. Working with the Spectator in Mind, by Derren Brown. If we are honest, what is our starting point for forming an effect? I feel there is a tendency amongst many magicians to start with a new move, some clever sleight, from some point of methodological skill. Then the possibilities of that move are explored until an effect is formed. Often that effect is marvelous, and one that will fool everyone. But to make it magical, the magician will have to change focus. And there, I feel, lies the rub. The question for the performer in forming an effect should not be, "What can I do?" or "How can I use this?" The ultimate questions that will lead to truly magical effects must be spectator-centric. What would really freak out a spectator? What would convince them that I possessed this power? What would move them in a particular way? And what would they want to see? Only after answering this, I think one should ask, And what then can I provide to take it a step further? It is my opinion that this leads to a more creative process. The performer is placing himself in the position of the spectator. He is subjecting everything that he does or desires as a performer to the consideration of the effect that it would have on a spectator. This consideration is paramount also in the performance, not just the effects themselves. I remember recently visiting the restaurant where I regularly perform here in Bristol. I was sat in the spacious Byzantine lounge area where attractive staff and a belly dancer pampered the guests. This was after maybe 10 years of performing, but was the first time I ever got a clear sensation of exactly how I would feel if I were to be approached by a magician. It occurred to me that in those years of performing, I could never have really considered that. I realized how easily a chirpy, adequate magician would have made me cringe and been utterly out of place. I saw that I wanted to be pampered, not made to feel self-conscious. Had I really been ensuring that my little audiences had actually warmed to me and felt comfortable? I imagined a suave and theatrically dressed chap coming over and introducing himself with a charming and discreet air, asking if he might join us for a few moments. I saw that it would be exactly right, exciting and elevating. But how easy it would have been to get that wrong. I realized that through feeling insecure about approaching a table and compensating through brashness, I had probably alienated a lot of people in the past. How easy it is to be an embarrassing imbecile with this work. Setting a context. These thoughts led me to restructuring much of my close-up performance. Here I can only speak of how it affected my own style, which is appropriate to the venues where I perform. But I think the questions and considerations, but I make no presumptions about my answers, are worthwhile for anyone to take on board. Those that have will realize how rewarding such a reappraisal is. The magician's first task is to set a context for his performance. I see the group as a tabula rasa. I approach them. I feel, with charm and confidence, and quickly achieve rapport. Yet I also retain an authority that I want them to feel. I want to be seen to be withholding something. I want to hold a promise of something for them. I want to give them time to get ready for the magic, to become curious and attentive, to watch essentially on my terms. This is much more enjoyable than launching into a routine immediately. I can learn everyone's name and make sure that they know mine. I am, after all, coming into their group uninvited. I have a vast responsibility to be at least civil. Again, I remember Eugene at that convention. The magic can start long before you start, in effect. I also remember that if I am walking into their space to perform, I am asking them to form judgments about me. Any magician that begins a table hopping set with the selection of a card or the inspection of an object is deluding himself if he thinks the audiences are interested in the cards or prop for those moments. They are forming their opinions about the performer and assessing how they feel about him. I feel it is much better to realize that and give them a chance to like me and respect me before I start performing my magic for them. For me, another result of making these changes was that I started to really and reliably enjoy table hopping and walk-around magic. This may sound strange, but I trust that all of us that perform regularly will be familiar with the terrible ennui that can set in before approaching the first group of the evening, or starting again after a break. We're not in the mood. I found that by changing the way I interacted with the spectators and slowing down my performance to allow them to feel charmed and respected, I never again felt that grotesque reluctance to perform that comes when one has to force oneself into an upbeat state unwillingly. There was no need to do that. My performance became more honestly me. An exaggerated version of me, certainly, but I no longer had to become something that I wasn't. The next level where one must be aware of setting a context, I feel, is finding a meaning for the effect itself. Much has been said on this by other authors, and I do not have the years behind me, nor the standing, to speak with the same authority. Similarly, I can add nothing very new to the discussion. But consider this if what you are presenting to the spectators is seen to be a puzzle to be solved. Then they will be concerned with that task. And as with any puzzle offered, if they cannot arrive at the right answer themselves, then they will feel entitled to be told the solution. If the performer does not offer one, then they are entitled to feel resentful. I think of those ghastly lateral thinking problems that a particular type of person enjoys offering for solution. Rather than simple murder, one engages in an attempt to find an answer, depending on how polite one feels one should be. Imagine if one genuinely tried to work out the problem, until finally giving up, to find that the poser of the problem had no intention of confiding the answer. Heaven forfend that any of us should be such arses in our performance, but the question of what meaning we are attaching to the effect is vital to performing strong magic that transcends the mundane. If I may be so bold as to offer an example from my own repertoire, then I would direct the reader to my effect, transformation. This is, from a technical point of view, little more than some cards changing on the table, but it will have immense personal resonance for the spectator. Inasmuch as it is important to relate the effect to the life of your spectator for them to find some meaning inherent in it, there is little in the realm of magic and mentalism more relevant to a spectator than a personal reading, which forms the structure of the effect. A tabula rasa. I would suggest that the participant with whom you are about to begin your magic presents a clear, open, and responsive slate for you to fill with emotional information. Most will have had no experience of live magic before, and even more will have had no previous experience of your magic. The spectator or participant awaits cues from you to know how to behave. Presuming that you have picked your participant with a reasonable degree of wisdom, you can presume that she is eager to be helpful and not appear to be incompetent of performing the tasks at hand. This is why I believe before anything else regarding performing effects, that what you perform should be presented as essentially serious. Not necessarily solemn, but essentially serious. When I think of an effect in this way, I imagine it to seem to have integrity, relevance, and elegance. Although it may be communicated with humor, it is clear that it is not trivial. The adult spectator realizes that magic is an adult art. Because your participant comes to you eager to learn how she should respond to your performance and instructions, you have the choice of whether she responds to them in a transient, lightly amused way, or whether she takes something rather personal and marvelous away with her. Behind each effect I perform is the question of whether the presentation and communication of the effect are worthy of it. The effect has potential for unspeakably powerful impact. Where along that line am I performing it? Am I merely trivializing it? If we take, then, as our starting point that our participant is open to suggestion and emotional and psychological direction, we can now consider what emotions and states of mind are useful to elicit, and how to do so. Paul Harris has written marvelously about how magic takes us back to our infantile state of astonishment, that the experience of wonder triggers that early period when nothing made sense and the world was one of unfurling surprise. It seems to me that this would be a marvelous experience for a spectator of my magic to have. When I began to consider this, I saw the importance of eliciting emotions with the magic to give it a deep resonance and to provide an emotive journey of some sort for my audiences. May I suggest that your aim as a magician is to create and manipulate wonder and astonishment while avoiding confusion and mere puzzle solving on the part of the spectator. There is an inherent beauty in possibly all effects, something that can be found and brought out. If the audience finds a sense of that beauty and even artistry, it will be easier for you to help them attach an emotional meaning to the effect. Derren Brown, Pure Effect, 2000. Derren Brown. Derren Brown's writings are, I believe, among the most significant of the last 2 decades. By his choice, Pure Effect and Absolute Magic are extremely hard to find. Brown wishes to keep his many public fans from discovering these writings. I am forever in his debt for allowing us to republish some of his most poignant thoughts in this collection. Growing as a magician is not about agreeing with everything we're told. These essays are persuasive, but above all, they are meant to challenge us, to make us question what we believe. I say this because I have come to disagree with the main thesis of Mr. Close's essay, which follows. So why is it included here? Maybe I was just in the right place at the right time, but as a boy, I saw Michael Close perform and speak often. His words influenced me, perhaps more than any other magician. When he wrote that the biggest lie in magic is this, it's fun to be fooled, I listened. I adjusted my thoughts and performances accordingly. But over time, my experience contradicted that of Mr. Close. I have come to believe that for all but the most insecure among us, being fooled is a blast. I love when an unexpected movie ending surprises me. I love puzzles I can't quite figure out, and I relish the times when a magic trick completely fools me. Unapologetically, I love to be fooled, and so do most spectators I encounter. The idea of changing the way we deliver our magic to soften the impact on a spectator's ego is, to me, a mistake. Yet I believe this essay to be invaluable to my development as a magician, not because I agree or disagree with the content, but because it challenged me to think deeper about my work. Whether your experiences are closer to Michael's or my own, if this essay helps you crystallize your feelings on the matter, you will have taken a giant step forward in your magical development. The Big Lie by Michael Close. As magicians, lying is part of our arsenal of weapons. Without concealing or distorting the truth, there is no deception. Unfortunately, we also lie to ourselves. The biggest and most insidious lie is the one we saw on our first magic catalog or in our first magic shop. Here is the lie. It's fun to be fooled. This is a hurtful fabrication. It is not fun to be fooled. People do not like to be fooled. If it were fun to be fooled, then Richard Nixon would still be President of the United States. The nature being demands seeking out answers to that which cannot be explained. People can become indignant, angry, or resentful if they are deceived. Being fooled is not a pleasant experience. Anyone who tells you differently is naive, stupid, or trying to sell you something. But the definition of magic I am using demands that the spectators be fooled. If the spectators can concoct any satisfying solution, then there is no magic. This is a dilemma. To accomplish my goal, I must do the most hurtful thing possible to the spectators. What can I do? How do I soften the impact of the hurt and ease any possible resentment that the spectators may feel toward me? This problem of how to structure a routine in such a way that it minimizes the negative aspects of being fooled is of major importance. Unfortunately, few magicians are even aware of the big lie, and fewer still have ever considered how to solve the problem. Curiously enough, someone has done research into this problem and has developed results that point toward workable solutions. What is even more curious is that this information is almost totally unknown to magicians. This is magic's loss, and I intend to rectify the situation now. The information you are about to learn will lead us away from the big lie and all its related trauma, and will head it out of the woods. Dr. Nagler's study. Some months ago, I was having a phone conversation with Scotty York. During the chat, Scotty asked if I was familiar with a book called Your Audience Really Doesn't Like Being Fooled, written by Dr. William Nagler. I was unfamiliar with this work. Scotty sent me some information. What I read came as both a revelation and vindication, since what Dr. Nagler had discovered in a laboratory setting totally agreed with what I had stumbled on through 14 years of performing for real people. Dr. Nagler's study sprang from knowing about the big lie. Using more than 50 students as subjects, Dr. Nagler and his associates recorded both physiological and psychological data as the subjects watched magic performances. From this data, Dr. Nagler extrapolated 4 approaches that would minimize the negative effects of being fooled. I was surprised to discover that those routines in my repertoire that I felt were the most effective fell into one or more of these categories. Through trial and error, over a long period of time, without realizing what I was doing, I had structured my routines to minimize audience animosity. Dr. Nagler's 4 categories are conspiratorial, triumphant, distancing, and non-magic. I will explain each one. Conspiratorial approach. The magician takes the spectator in his confidence, as if both were unable to understand why the trick works. My angle on this approach is, as much as possible, to have the spectator be responsible for the magic. Examples of this are Dr. Strange Trick and the El Cheapo Magic Club. The spectator is the one doing the trick. I'm as amazed as everyone else. Triumphant approach. The trick has apparently failed, but the magician pulls it out at the end. This has the aspect of a sucker trick, but you don't shove the spectators' noses in it. While most people hate to be fooled, they also don't like to see a performer screw up a trick. When the trick has apparently gone astray, the spectators feel sorry for the magician. When the magician triumphs over apparent failure, the spectators cheer his success, even though it means that they were fooled. An example of this occurs at the end of The Frog Prince, where it seems the frog found the wrong card. Distancing approach. The magician removes himself one step away from the action by couching the entire trick in terms of a story. Almost every trick I do involves this approach to some extent, but good examples are the pothole trick and a visit from Rocco. Non-magic approach. The comedy and byplay involved in the routine is really more important than the magic. Down for the Count is an example of this. These types of routines are important. It isn't vital that every routine be a brain basher. If I perform 3 tricks at a table, it is likely that the middle trick will be of this type. If you examine the routines in the Workers series, you will find that they fit into one or more of these categories. You can understand why I was both surprised and vindicated. I always knew that these routines worked, but now I knew why. In addition to Dr. Nagler's 4 categories, I would offer 2 more suggestions, one from Alex Elmsley and one from myself. Elmsley suggested that if the spectators could anticipate the climax of a routine an instant before it happened, then even though they would be fooled, they would feel some sense of accomplishment. I would agree with this assessment with the following warning. The technical requirements of the trick must be completed before the point in time when the spectators anticipate the climax. Here's what I mean. At the end of the Frog Prince, the spectators realize the folded-up frog is going to be the selected card. But at the point that they realize this, the frog has already been switched. I am clean. Technically, the trick is over. But, as I mentioned in the last chapter, the card in the box, the spectator anticipation happens at the wrong time. They realize the card in the box will be the spectator's card, but I haven't switched it yet. I hope this clarifies my point. One more suggested approach I would offer is this. The last trick of your performance need not fall into one of the above categories. After all, at the end of this trick you are leaving, so it is not vital that you be nice. The big surprise is not a nice trick. It kicks people in the head. But I don't care, because I'm walking off stage. I want people to remember me, and the best way to accomplish that is to fool them to death just before I leave. We're back home. I think we've had enough of a walk for one day. I did not discuss the theatrical structuring of a routine, but that can be a topic for another time. In this regard, though, some of the best advice on the subject was offered by Alex Elmsley. He suggested that at every point in time in a routine, we ask ourselves 2 questions. Number 1, is something of interest happening? And number 2, can the audience appreciate the effect? Elmsley's exposition on these 2 questions is required reading for anyone who is interested in presentation and showmanship. His entire essay can be found in the collected works of Alex Elmsley, pages 3 to 14. This wraps up the first part of my magical filtration system. Other essays will examine other elements. I hope that the above information will be useful as you build your own sieve. Michael Close, Workers 3, 1993. Michael Close. Semantic debates rage on as to whether or not magic is an art form. Magicians like Michael Close make it clear that the very best magicians are artists. One need only read his 5-volume Workers series to witness a man who creates personalized, autobiographical presentations, original magic effects and plots, and who thinks deeply about the potential of magic. To know what our spectators are thinking during a magic effect, we must train ourselves to think like our spectators. At the highest level, this means anticipating a spectator's thoughts, words, and actions before they even occur to the spectator. It sounds more like a mentalism effect than a viable technique, but Pitt Hartling shares with us several useful tactics on how we can influence and control the very thought patterns of our audiences. Inducing Challenges by Pitt Hartling. Let me shuffle the cards. Make it go to my pocket. Can you put the pieces together again? During a lively session of close-up magic, spectators occasionally suggest effects or conditions. While some of these suggestions are nothing more than little jokes, can you make my boss disappear? Others are actual challenges, either meant to put the performer to the test or put forth in the hope to get to see some even more fascinating effect. Getting challenged can be a problem. What if a spectator wants to shuffle the deck in the middle of your favorite memorized deck routine? What if you spent the last 10 minutes to demonstrate your supposed ability to divine freely chosen cards, and now a spectator takes out her own deck, picks any card, and asks you to name it? Challenges can create awkward moments. Incidentally, I believe those moments are weak, not because they show that our magic is only a work of fiction. That should be clear anyway. But because these moments are dramatically inconsistent. It's like the old joke. Somebody knocks on the clairvoyant's door, and the master asks, "Who is it?" But of course, there's also the other side of the story. Meeting a challenge usually generates reactions way out of proportion of the actual effect. I think two implications in particular make those moments so memorable. First, a spontaneous challenge apparently rules out advanced preparation. Second, the performer seems to be able to achieve anything. Spectators' spontaneous challenges can lead to some of the strongest moments possible in the performance of close-up magic. So, are challenges good or bad? On the one hand, we want to avoid dramatically weak moments. On the other hand, we don't want to lose the potential for a sensation. What do we do? Do we design our performances to leave only very limited place for challenges and sacrifice some opportunities? Or do we encourage challenges and risk not being able to meet most of them? This article takes a closer look at a third approach. Why not try to prevent those challenges we cannot meet and at the same time induce challenges we can meet? If our spectators keep challenging us, but only with challenges we are well prepared to meet, we will have the best of both worlds. The interesting point is that challenges do not seem to arise at random. They seem to be somehow triggered. If that were true, it would offer great opportunities. If we understood the causes for specific challenges, we could eliminate these causes in cases where we want to avoid being challenged and create them in instances we'd love to be challenged. Of course, we cannot really look into our spectators' minds, so there can hardly be a general answer. The following are just a few observations that might hint in the right direction. Desire. People tend to challenge us to do something desirable. This principle might account for challenges along the lines of, "Can you make a beer appear? Can you make my boss disappear?" Or, "Get me $1 million." Symbolism. The desire principle might also apply at a more abstract, unconscious level. It has been argued that there are strong symbols inherent in certain magical effects. Let's take triumph as an example. A deck of cards is shuffled face up and face down. The result is a mess. This automatically seems to create a certain conflict that waits to be resolved. If a deck accidentally drops to the floor and the cards get mixed up, there is a reasonable chance that somebody suggests to straighten them out by magic. In contrast, I have never been challenged to magically mix the cards face up and face down. Of course, there may be independent reasons for that observation, other than some obscure symbolism. For example, it is much more difficult to sort a deck than it is to mix it up. People might suggest using magic to put the cards in order, simply because it saves work and time. But if that were true, how would we explain the same contrast in the case of the linking rings? Linking or unlinking the rings is equally impossible and takes about the same time. Nevertheless, one state seems to trigger a challenge much more frequently than the other. When we show two separate rings and link them together, chances are that after a while, spectators will challenge us to take them apart again. When starting with two linked rings and taking them apart, however, the challenge to put them back together does not arise nearly as frequently. And if it does, it is mostly followed by the request to unlink the rings again. Maybe the explanation for these observations lies in symbolism. Might the unlinked condition of the rings be considered the more relaxed, free, natural state, while the linked condition contains an inherent conflict that cries to be resolved? All well and good. But what does all this have to do with actual performance? A lot, I think. One practical consequence of the above observations about triumph, for example, could be this. When performing an effect which ends with the deck in a face-up and face-down mess, like for example Darwin Ortiz's Blockbuster out of Card Sharpe, Ortiz 1995, or Party Animal from The Book, The Flinging Fingers 1998. Be prepared for the challenge to put the cards right again. If you don't want that to happen, place the cards away immediately or do something to prevent the challenge. Or, and that's the other way of dealing with the situation, immediately after the effect, secretly straighten out the deck using, for example, Leonard Green's angle separation. Then briefly complain that this trick always leaves the deck in such a mess and wait for somebody to suggest you magically straighten the cards. If somebody takes the bait, you can milk the situation, first pretending that this is, of course, impossible, making the spectator insist, etc., and finally, really doing it. As an example of how to apply the concept of inducing challenges to a well-known effect, let's take David Williamson's torn and restored transpo from Williamson's Wonders, Kaufman, 1989. At the end of the first phase of this routine, you are left with a selected card torn into 4 pieces. Again, this situation seems to contain an inherent symbolic conflict. Instead of simply continuing the routine, in the second phase the card is restored and in the third phase the creases are removed, you could pretend the trick is over. Pause and play with the pieces, arranging them on the table to form the card, etc. If there is any truth in the theory of symbolism, and my own experience is not just a collection of mere coincidences, somebody will sooner or later challenge you to put the pieces back together. When that happens, you can be reluctant at first and dramatize the situation any way you see fit before actually doing it. This specific routine by David Williamson allows you to push the concept even further. You might easily cause somebody to challenge you to remove the creases by saying, "This leaves the card just as in the beginning, brand new, just as it came from the factory." With just the slightest bit of luck, this obviously wrong claim will provoke contradiction and cause somebody to point out that the card is still heavily creased. Pretend this is the most demanding crowd you have ever performed for, and finish by effortlessly fulfilling even their most extravagant wishes. Past experience. Apparently, challenges can be triggered by past experience. Suppose during your act that you make cards appear out of thin air. Later, somebody asks for a business card and you cannot find one. There's a reasonable chance somebody will half-jokingly suggest you just reach out and grab one from the air. Similarly, if you perform Miser's Dream and later are a quarter short to pay your drink, don't be surprised to get challenged. One more example. During an effect, you give a spectator a deck of cards to keep in his pocket and impress upon him not to let you touch the cards. After successfully finishing the trick, retrieve the deck and continue with some other effects. A few tricks later, you hand the same spectator a deck for safekeeping, this time without the request not to let you touch them. When you ask him to give you the deck near the end of this trick, he might remember the previous conditions and refuse to give you the cards, instead challenging you to let him count the cards, or whatever. Needless to say, you have designed the routine in such a way that you can now pretend to be in major trouble, while in fact easily being able to meet the challenge. Apart from desires, symbolism, and past experience, certain verbal structures seem to hold potential to induce challenges. Wrong claims. Inducing the challenge to remove the creases in David Williamson's routine introduced yet another strategy to trigger a challenge, provoking a contradiction by claiming something that is obviously wrong. Even though it is not included in the description, I am currently experimenting with this in the finale of Color Sense. Before naming the suit and value of the last card, I say, "You see, I can feel everything about the cards. Red, black, everything there is to know about a playing card." This might sound bold and obvious, but a few times already somebody said, "Can you also see the suit?" Emphasis. After secretly loading a card into a spectator's pocket, instead of simply having him reach inside and be surprised, you could try to induce a challenge through emphasis as follows. Make a duplicate travel to your pocket. Return it to the deck. Steal out the card and announce you will do it again, only more difficult. Place the deck far away and again remove the card from your pocket. This time, when you say, "And once more, the card is in my pocket," put some emphasis on the word my. If you try this for yourself right now, you might find that emphasizing that word brings to mind the phrase, "as opposed to somebody else's pocket." If necessary, repeat the short effect together with a similar sentence and the same emphasis. You may feel this is like waving a huge red sign, but when the spectator finally suggests you make the card appear in his pocket, he will usually have no doubt it was his own idea. Ambiguous communication and apparent misunderstandings. Another way to make spectators request something is actually to suggest it yourself without actually saying so. To stay with the card to pocket example, after having made the card travel to your pocket a few times, say, "And of course it can go to any pocket," and at the same time clearly gesture towards him and his pocket. Immediately follow with, "this one or that one," this time pointing to various pockets on your own person. Even though the first part of the sentence clearly communicated the idea of the card going to the spectator's pocket, you have not actually said anything to that effect. This allows you credibly to deny that the idea has ever crossed your mind. You, of course, meant any of your own pockets. To the spectator, it will seem like a short misunderstanding at most. But now that the challenge is out, let's see you do it. Well, if you insist. Incidentally, a simple way to give the impression of not having planned anything and at the same time make your spectators insist on their challenge is to pretend not to understand. For example, you might say, "Well, what do you mean, in your pocket?" The spectator will repeat his idea, explaining it even more clearly. This will almost automatically sound like a challenge and give a very clear conflict. These few examples should suffice to show that, like so many things in magic, challenges are a question of balance. On the one hand, the strategies must be clear and bold enough actually to work and trigger the correct challenge at least some of the time. On the other hand, one must avoid falling back on a sledgehammer that would make the procedure obvious. And at the risk of stating the obvious, one last important point. When meeting an induced challenge, the situation and final effect must appear unrehearsed. You are seemingly just picking up a spectator's spontaneous idea. This is not the moment for elaborate presentation or carefully scripted poetry in rhyme and meter. Credits and comments. While I am not aware of any written discussion of this concept, I certainly do not claim any originality. There are countless examples of the strategy in action in the performances of, mostly close-up, magicians all over the world. Symbolism. One of the first to explicitly talk about the role of symbolism in magic was Juan Tamariz. Some of his early writings on this topic can be found in The Circular, the organ of the Escuela de la Magia de Madrid. A thorough discussion is to be included in his upcoming work, The Magic Rainbow. Anything I may know about these things, I learned from Juan. Pitt Hartling, Card Fictions, 2003. Pitt Hartling. Pitt Hartling's fantastic Card Fictions proves that you can't judge things by their size. His work is cut from the finest cloth. Every routine breaks new ground, has an integrated presentation, and a smart method. Eugene Berger gives serious consideration to his audience's thoughts and interests. Here, he takes us on a journey that ends with a beginning. We are taken through the steps he followed to create his opening line, and I think it's one of the all-time great opening lines. Eugene's essay operates on his assumption that magic tricks really are not very entertaining in and of themselves. This is a notion also put forth by Dariel Fitzkee in Showmanship for Magicians. My experience, which falls 30 years short of Eugene's, is that this is entirely conditional. Darwin Ortiz also disagrees and refers to this notion as Fitzkee's fallacy. I have encountered many people who, as Eugene points out, find magic an unwelcome intrusion. But I have encountered at least as many people who are infinitely amazed by the visceral acts of magic tricks, with or without elaborate presentations. Whether or not you make the same assumption Eugene does, every performance you give must include certain assumptions about your audience. These assumptions are predictions, really, about how your audience will perceive you and your material. Know what these assumptions are, and identify the outcomes of being right or wrong. Creating Interest by Eugene Berger. Every exploration begins somewhere. If I want to visit Los Angeles, for example, I must begin from somewhere else, from someplace concrete, Chicago, or New York, or Piggly Falls. In much the same way, every exploration of an area of thought and action, such as conjuring, begins with the assumptions and preconceptions of the explorer. Every thinker has his assumptions, those accumulated beliefs which seem so perfectly obvious to him that he wonders why everyone else doesn't share them as well. I tell you this because I want to explain one of my most fundamental magical assumptions, even though it might strike some readers as being highly unorthodox, if not downright heretical. The assumption is this: magic tricks really are not very entertaining in and of themselves. In my own work, I assume this to be true. I assume that strangers really are not very interested in watching card tricks, that they might even find the idea of watching a card trick an unwelcome intrusion into other, more personally interesting things currently happening in their own time and space. In other words, while the fact that the 7 of clubs and the 4 of diamonds have changed places on the table may make most magicians sit up and take notice, for the average layman, well, it's most likely to be seen as a bit trivial. I think this is a good assumption for magicians to make, because it explains why the performance of card tricks can so easily generate a response of resistance and sometimes even hostility from spectators. The fact is that people often find it irritating and not entertaining to be confronted with other people who know things that they do not know. In the same way, while in a formal setting, such as a concert or a Las Vegas show, people may enjoy seeing other people in the spotlight. In an informal setting, these very same people often do not enjoy other people being in the spotlight, because the truth is that they, themselves, would rather be the center of everyone's attention. Excuse the pun. Doing card tricks, especially for a living, is a tricky business. In my own work, I repeat, I assume that people do not find magic entertaining, and I therefore assume further that it is my job to figure out how to get people interested in watching the card tricks that I do to pay my rent. Creating interest. This is the challenge and opportunity of close-up performing. If I want to make an impact upon a group of people, the first thing I must do is get them genuinely interested in what I am doing. This is critically important. If I fail to create this interest, the impact that I will be able to make will, of necessity, be minimal. The first step is to be interested myself, sometimes modestly, sometimes passionately. If I want spectators to become interested in my magic, they must perceive me as being interested in it myself. If I want them to think it is important, I must think it is important. Two people are talking in a restaurant lounge. I am the magician, and I watch them. They are talking with each other, yes, but they are also looking about the room, watching other people as they enter and leave. I watch their eyes. They are not talking about lost or found love. They are not talking about business. If I am observant, I can see this simply by watching them. Their interest in the room, in what's happening here, is obvious to me if I am watching. I must make my approach. I prefer my arrival to coincide with a time when they are not talking to each other, when they are quietly looking about the room. I approach. I stand in front of them. They look at me. I smile and look at each of them in the eyes, pause, and say, "I'm the magician here. Would you like to see the greatest card trick of the 20th century?" My smile broadens. They smile too. Their smile says yes, but I want them to say the word. I want them to begin to participate in what I will create. I do not want them to be passive spectators. How absolutely dull. I want them to be participants. Do you see the difference? I want them to become interested. Yet it is I who must stimulate their interest. I must win their interest. There are so many other things in this room at the moment that are also reaching out for their attention. The lights, the decor, other people, cruising as it is called. The music, the need to go to the bathroom, the desire to buy a package of cigarettes. The list of things that might be competing for their attention is endless. I am the magician, and I want their attention, and so I must create interest in what I am doing. I must win their interest and their attention from other things also reaching out to them. The smile is important, above all. I do not want to appear as a threat or as some crazy. Remember, we are in a restaurant lounge. This isn't a costume party or a seance. Two other performance settings with which I have had considerable experience, where one can execute one's approach in a way and manner that is more extreme, further out, and even bizarre. No, now I am in a restaurant, and I don't want people to scream in fear. Later, after the show has started, they may scream in delight, of course, because such laughter and screams of fun will make other patrons wonder what these people are doing, which seems to be so enjoyable. I must win their interest. I do this through my manner. I do it through my dress. I am wearing a tuxedo. The attire of the patrons in this restaurant, on the other hand, might be very casual. The tuxedo helps. The tuxedo makes my approach so much easier. Obviously, I am officially the magician, and not some bozo off the street wandering around, coming on to the patrons. My tuxedo, my costume for my role as a magician, protects me from many unpleasant situations which could otherwise accidentally arise. From their perception, here is this magician, and he seems as though he might be fun, and he's going to show us the greatest card trick of the 20th century. Well, yes, this approach is based on delivering the goods. I mean, you must now perform the greatest card trick of the 20th century. But you may exclaim, I'm not sure I know the greatest card trick of the 20th century. Relax. I think you do. Personally, at this point, I perform my own handling of card warp. Not only is this a very strong card trick, my presentation is short and direct. There isn't a lot of folding and proving and unfolding and proving some more, which, after a few drinks, is usually too confusing for the spectators on the one hand and slows down the action on the other. Stop. Don't you see that the greatest card trick of the 20th century at this time and place is any card trick that you perform very well and that is direct and surprising? Let's exclude those tricks wherein the spectator is asked to count 5 heaps of 5 cards, each 6 times, etc., etc., etc. You must do this trick well. You must sell it. What does that mean? It means, I submit, that you must know your material so well that your hands and mouth are, so to speak, on automatic pilot, and your attention is consequently not on making sure the trick works. You know it will work. Or at least you know that you can get out of any disaster which the fates might suddenly toss in your path. Your attention, rather, is on communicating with these people, your audience. It means looking at them, smiling, talking with them, listening to them when they talk. You can do this because you know this trick inside out. You have practiced it and rehearsed it, and you know that your performance of it has impact. You know it will produce a good response from your audience. At this moment, in this time and space, the greatest card trick of the 20th century is the card trick you know the best, that you can perform very, very well, and that is itself direct, deceptive, and surprising. It doesn't need to be any one trick. Hopefully, every magician will have his own greatest card trick of the 20th century. If every magician did have his own, wouldn't Magic Land be a lot more exciting and fun for everyone? And so, I deliver on my promise. As far as these people are concerned, they will see something really baffling, and, as far as they know, it might very well be the greatest card trick of the 20th century. If I have caught their interest, if I have won their attention, if they have been really fooled, then they will want to see some more. They are beginning to relax. This is fun, after all, and the truth is that many people in bars and lounges, even those present in groups, often feel alone. But now, suddenly, they are no longer alone. For a moment, for this instant, this marvelously official magician in his tuxedo is performing his wonders for me. The psychology of the singles bar scene is quite fascinating. People steam into such bars looking, often hoping, to meet someone and to become the center of his or her attention. Yet, in such places, meeting people is not often an easy thing to do. As a magician, I attempt to bring groups of people together. No one told me to do this. It isn't part of my job description. It is simply something I do. I introduce people to each other. I get their names and repeat them and use their names and thereby remember their names. And I see myself as the unofficial host in this room, whose job is not to see that the towels are changed in the men's room. I'll let the official host, the room manager, do that. But to bring groups of people together in this room that gets progressively more crowded with people as the evening wears on, until, when I finally leave, it is very often so packed with people everywhere that I am pleased to walk out into the fresh, late evening air. If I am performing at a cocktail party or a reception, I usually want to arrive before any of the guests. As the guests begin arriving, very often people do not know each other and, if I were not there, would stand apart in little groupings, isolated and watching. In such settings, too, I will bring these groups of people together. I will have everyone tell me their names, and I will encourage everyone to interact with me and with each other. When I leave this group, they will be talking with each other. And that, my friends, is real magic. And I will go on to other groups at the party, working my wonders and bringing these new groups of people together as well. Being a magician involves much more than simply performing one's magic tricks well. In his marvelous preface to How to Perform Instant Magic, Domus Books, 1980, J. Marshall sets down the ABC secret formula for learning magic. A. Learn how the trick is done. B. Learn how to do it. And C. Figure out how to present it. When I first read this preface, I thought to myself, good for you, Jay. You've said it all in a nutshell. Jay admits that the third step, figuring out how to present the magic we've finally learned to do, is the tough one, and that the start of being great is being different, yet acceptable and amusing. Learning how to present magic before audiences, he says, is an individual thing and the real secret is to study and think for yourself. When I begin to work on a new presentation, I usually spend the greatest amount of time on the presentation's opening line. I want the opening line to create interest in what is to follow. I want the opening line to hook them, so to speak, and therefore I very often use the technique of the direct question, the question mark being the sign of the hook. As Fritz Perls, the father of Gestalt therapy, was so fond of pointing out. Would you like to see the greatest card trick of the 20th century? It's a direct question calling for a response. Yes, I would. No, I wouldn't. The number of people who have said no to that question as I have asked it is surprisingly small, and I have asked the question of thousands of people. Eugene Berger, Intimate Power, 1983. Eugene Berger. Eugene Berger's influence on the theory of magic is tremendous, and his presence greatly affected the way I viewed magic. When I first saw him perform, I saw a magician who had different objectives than other performers I had seen. And I'm only one of thousands of magicians moved by Eugene's performances. In the next piece, Sam Sharpe wisely points out that we cannot simply think of magicians and effects as good and bad, but in terms of the right fit for the intended audience. I think this is a blind spot for magicians and in magic writing. Few have discussed the topic Mr. Sharpe raises here, and he goes on to qualify what he believes the best situation for magic is: a sophisticated audience watching a sophisticated brand of magic. Written in 1932, the essay's message feels fresh and topical, even if the writing and examples are dated. You're about to read a reference to the Foxtrot dance step. Popularity by S.H. Sharpe. A production which is popular with the public is always sound in a sense, for the first aim of art is entertainment, and if the public show their approval, then all the critics in the world cannot alter their verdict. It is important to realize this. The public is always the final judge, and though the critics may deplore their taste, the fact remains. The highbrow is not willing to admit this. He pretends to despise public favor, and consequently, his work remains in obscurity. If we consider any recognized work of art, we find that, due to its masterly simplicity, its appeal is almost universal. It probably appeals to different people in different ways, some enjoying its superficial effect, others its profundity, but all gain some kind of pleasure from it. Then again, works of art are not produced according to a formula. As Francis Bacon says in his essay on beauty, "There is no excellent beauty that hath not some strangeness in the proportion." A man cannot tell whether Apelles or Albrecht Dürer were the more trifler, whether the one would make a personage by geometrical proportions, the other by taking the best parts out of divers faces. To make one excellent, he must do it by a kind of felicity, as a musician that maketh an excellent air in music, and not by rule. What precepts are usually considered to govern their creation, resulting in formal art, are based on the analysis of works which have been successful in the past. That is to say, those which have gained public approval. A work of art which fails to give enjoyment fails in its primary purpose. However, it sometimes happens that failure is due to work being presented to the wrong type of audience, or one in the wrong mood. For some people prefer sensation, others spectacle, comedy, thought-provoking or awe-inspiring entertainments. Some seek relaxation, some stimulation, while others are not particular so long as they are amused. For there are those who, for the most part, are capable of nothing but inexplicable, dumb shows and noise, and must have comedy exaggerated into horseplay, and serious presentation into melodrama before they can understand them. If a person bound for Maskelyne's theater found himself in the Queen's Hall next door, through mistaking the entrances, he would probably be disappointed with the program, because though he might be an admirer of Sir Henry Wood's conducting, it is unlikely that he would be in the mood for music. Another disadvantage is for the theater to be inaccessible, uncomfortable, or usually given to presentations of a different character. If, then, a production fails, it must be due either to the thing itself, the presentation, the showmanship, or the audience. Mr. Devant has stated, "One way of discovering the worth of a trick is very simple. Test it before an audience. If the trick passes that test, it is a good trick. But should it fail, what then? It may be the audience or the conjurer, and not the effect, which is at fault." The average man in the street, on viewing one of Epstein's sculptures, such as Rene, will deride it. But only a prejudiced man or an ignoramus would agree with him offhand. It is a poor work of art that can be appreciated to the full with no more effort than is needed to enjoy the picture on a chocolate box or Where's My Sugar Baby Now? The Foxtrot. This question of vox populi, or voice of the people, is a debatable one. Is public opinion always right? I should be inclined to say no, if by the public is meant any indiscriminate gathering of people. But where the audience is one composed of individuals of the kind to whom the work in question is directed, it seems to me that the mass opinion is likely to be final. The slogan, "It is not the trick, but the man," sounds conclusive, but it is not true, because though a beginner may fail with a good trick, an expert can never make a real success of a poor one. The slogan should be, "It is not the trick or the man, but both." I have said earlier on that the audience may be satisfied with an inferior production. But, even so, such production may be justified if it amuses those whom it sets out to amuse. The question arises, if various kinds of production suit different sections of the community, which is really the best? For each appears to be best to those who enjoy it the most. The answer is, naturally, that which appeals to the highest intellect. This at once places those effects, which are chiefly of a spectacular nature and capable of appreciation with little mental effort, at the lower end of the scale, and those needing close concentration at the higher. Though the first aim of a magician is to mystify, there is no reason why he should fail to provide material for reflection in addition. In capable hands, the floating ball is a beautiful effect, savoring of real magic. But if presented as the mysterious universe, and given a suitable dramatic setting, according to the producer's imagination, it becomes something more than mere entertainment by awakening some mysterious, indefinable faculty in the soul which seems to perceive things our physical senses are unable to transmit to consciousness. Of course, the deeper effects cannot be expected to appeal to the masses. It pleased not the million, 'twas caviar to the general, who only seek frivolity and triviality in their entertainments, and to whom, therefore, it is a case of what care I how fair she be, if she be not fair to me, where the higher flights are concerned. If we not only have our feet firmly planted on the earth, but our heads almost permanently bent towards it also, how can we be expected to think Apollo's music superior to Pan's? A true work of art improves with repetition, and only on this account can it live through the ages. We delight in seeing classical effects presented time and time again within reason. But the more we see of the poorer ones, the more bored we become, though we may have enjoyed them on the first acquaintance. In this way, conjuring effects are like friends. The harder they are to know, the more they are likely to be worth knowing. S. H. Sharpe, Neomagic, 1932. In select chapters of this audiobook, we explored strategies to help us think like those we wish to deceive. Let's conclude on this subject with an essay by Argentina's Rene Lavand, whose brief, poetic essay mirrors exactly his style of performance. Spectators by Rene Lavand. I have always liked to analyze the different reactions among audiences in an attempt to understand how to gear myself to each particular situation. I have been doing this for many years, and, I must confess, although I can clearly differentiate reactions, I cannot find definitive answers to the question. There exists a range of audiences with different reactions, interminable gray areas that make up the psychology of the people that pay, or don't pay, to see us. Some audiences are irritated at not being able to rationalize the subtle deceit, while others enjoy allowing themselves to be fooled. Trying to find answers and simplify my task, I have eliminated the audiences who fall into the middle gray area and instead concentrate on the spectators at one extreme, the ones that cannot or don't want to let go of rationality. Among these rational ones, I have observed two main types: those who are irritated and complain about not being able to let go of their rationalizing, and those who come to my show without any other motive than to solve the puzzle. I try to imagine myself in the spectator's position. To what sort of audience do I belong? Sitting in a chair in front of a colleague, what do I try to do? I only want to enjoy the illusion. I am unarmed and have eliminated everything which might obscure my pleasure as a spectator. There are audiences that express challenge to the magician, as if ready to discover the secret, refusing defiantly to be fooled, to see the artist as an opponent that is challenging them. If you figure out the trick, you win. If you don't, I win. I ask them, do you want to kill your own illusion? Big mistake. Have you come to enjoy the tenderness of the marionette, or to discover the strings that give it life? If books are written about how to enjoy music, I want to mention something about how to enjoy illusion. Get rid of any preconceptions and sit back in your chair. Enjoy total relaxation, which will permit the performer to communicate amiably. This posture allows you to hear his words more clearly, enabling you to savor the pauses. Your eyes will permit the enjoyment of the effect. Try to enjoy as a child, knowing what you know as an adult. The most sophisticated audiences that I have been fortunate to perform for are not doubters, but those with special expectations who seem to say, We don't want to know how you do it, thank you. We want to be children again. The powerful effect of excellent illusions artistically performed by an artist can last for years. Rene Lavand, The Mysteries of My Life, 1998. Rene Lavand. At the age of 9, Rene Lavand lost the use of his right hand in a car crash. The loss of a hand could have been a barrier to entry into magic. Instead, it helped define Lavand's style. He developed moves and routines performable with only one hand, yet this only accounts for a portion of his singular success. Lavand also developed an autobiographical style in which he recounted stories of his life through his magic. In his native Argentina, he was revered as much for his stories as he was for his magic.